What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? Good to see you, gang. Sorry for starting up a couple minutes late there. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with a lookup. I was updating the sheet here, and for some reason one of the lookups isn't working, and I'm just trying to figure out where I went haywire. So bear with me one sec while I'm staring this down here. But hopefully you guys are doing well out there. Nice little Friday. Big slate Friday action. 11 games on DraftKings, 13 games on FanDuel. Should be a total mess as usual. A lot of fun. I am not sure why the hell this isn't working. It doesn't really matter, and it's really just a lookup issue, but it's really just kind of bothering me because it's on like the top 3 guys on the thing who all have juniors on their name: Scottie Pippen, Jaren Jackson, and Brandon Boston, who, as sorted by FanDuel, are like 3 of the top guys. And we got to a bunch of at least 2 of those guys. But for some reason, the against the field lookup is not working for me. And I cannot figure out why. Bang, bang. Lookup. 1, 2. That should just be pulling that, because I changed it. Oh, you know what it is? I bet I know what it is. Yep. All right. And what we want to do is... All right. Hang on. I think I can do it this way. This is a fun way to start the show, isn't it? I just ran a fresh sim right at the end there and dropped it in here, and that's when I caught that this was coming up this way. And like I said, I just wanted to get it right. Okay. All right. I think that at least caught the juniors. I just did a quick sloppy, just replace the name. Anybody else will handle like with a 3rd or a 4th or whatever. We'll handle on an individual basis, but I got the dashboard working here, so we're back. All right. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there, staring at my ugly mug while I'm focused on this. Anybody do well last night? I was all over the top of the FanDuel board for most of that tournament, and then fell off a little bit just around some of my value guys. Trying to think of who let me down. Like Cody Williams let me down as like a just, cheap square in a couple good lineups. Dalen Terry didn't have a great game as like a cheap square that we talked about during the show. But like so many of the key plays that we got to, most specifically the big pieces from Milwaukee. But solid, profitable night. Just was early on looking like it was going to be quite a bit better. But I was really happy that I had a few unique lineups, few single lineups that were very competitive throughout the tournament on a short slate like that. That's really all you can hope for, and put a few of them into top 1% at least. So was happy with that. But could have used a couple better performances from those like lower mid type guys. Would have been a better night. But anyway, big slates to talk about today. Like I was saying, we've got whoops. Hadn't shared the screen yet. We've got another choppy slate, so we'll have our usual back and forth mixed results to discuss. But it is a big slate on both sites. DraftKings only cut the 2 10 p.m. games today, so we've got 11 on DK, 13 on FanDuel. Lots to work on. The injury board, honestly, isn't completely tragic for such a big slate. And I'll start there. For some reason, Joker chose to sit in the other room for the start of the show, and he was just whining, so I'm sure he'll be in here in a second. So I'll start there. Rui Hachimura got upgraded to probable. That was the most recent piece of news in the pre-show run-up, and it looks like that is still the most recent piece of news. Other probables: Andrew Nembhard, Brandon Miller, Grant Williams, Giannis, Bradley Beal, Tyler Hero is available, and Jackson Hayes. Questionables: TJ McConnell, Zion Williamson, obviously a biggie, Noah Clowney, mid-grade kind of one to watch. Draymond, D'Anthony Melton, Brandon Podziemski, Sam Merrill, Dean Wade, Gary Trent, Cam Payne, Steven Adams, Jaime Jaquez, Marvin Bagley, John Conchar, and Jamal Murray. So there's a couple, big to medium impact names on that questionable list. I don't know, outside of maybe Zion as like the star level, what the earth-shattering ones in that list would be, though. A lot of them are situations we've been handling already. Not that Zion isn't, but that's the biggest name on that group of questionables. Most impactful, potentially. As far as guys that we know are going to be out, this is a much longer list. Buckle up. I just enjoy basically reading the same names every day, I got to say. Bogdan Bogdanovic, Kobe Buffkin, DeAndre Hunter, Vic Krejci, Seth Lundy, Cody Zeller. Jalen Duren is doubtful. Seems like he's almost certainly not going to play. Ajer Thompson, Isaiah Jackson, Aaron Nesmith, James Wiseman. Both Jackson and Wiseman out for the season. I'm going to start taking them out of this list soon. Miles Bridges, Daquan Jeffries, Nick Richards, Mark Williams, Jordan Hawkins, Herbert Jones, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, DeJounte Murray, Paulo Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr., Bojan Bogdanovic, Daron Sharp, Trendon Watford, Jaylen Brown. Luke Cornett is also doubtful. That's impactful for the Celtics. Neemias Queta is looking like a piece of value. Kristaps Porzingis remains out. Max Strus, Chris Middleton, Precious Achiuwa is still out. Mitch Robinson still out. Ryan Dunn is doubtful. Dante Exum, Maxi Kleba is doubtful. Derek Lively is out. PJ Washington still out as well. Definitely, some still big impact in Dallas there. Isaiah Hartenstein still out. Jalen with a Y still out. Kenrich out. Saddiq Bey is out. Malcolm Brogdon, who I seem to have misspelled on the website. Fix that. Kyle Kuzma, Desmond Bane, Gigi Jackson. Ja Morant is a biggie in that mess from Memphis. Everybody's out, but Ja being out is most impactful. Marcus Smart, Cam Spencer, Vince Williams Jr., Kevin Love, Lako Konkar, Aaron Gordon remains out. Mo Bamba, Kawhi Leonard still out. PJ Tucker, Devin Carter, Orlando Robinson, Joel Embiid is still out. Tyrese Maxey is now out for the Sixers. Big impact late. And then Jared Vanderbilt and Christian Wood are both still out. Let me click update just to fix that Malcolm Brogdon spelling. On the Vegas board, that first game is probably the least interesting game on the entire slate, unless maybe we get some value shift around Zion. We'll see where some pieces and parts came up, though, on the New Orleans side, just because they're already missing so much. So maybe some pieces will slip through when we start looking through some of the sim results. Orlando, I feel like, is probably going to be mostly normalized to corrected salaries, but they'll still have some impactful pieces as far as there's always going to be decent mid-range plays from that team. The Suggses, the Wagners of the world, and then like Goga, when he's getting this many minutes on a per-minute basis, still going to look pretty good even with his price up. It's just not going to be the crazy potential value play, but I'm sure we'll see some shares of him. Hawks and the Pistons looking like a better game environment, more competitive. A 1-point game with a 227.5 point total. That first one was a 6-point game in Orlando's favor at home with those missing parts from both teams, really. 213.5 total, though really low end total. Not that appealing outside of just getting to some shares. But in the Atlanta-Detroit game, there's a mix. Atlanta's still missing several guys, so we're just going to have that usual group of, now they're not necessarily crazy values. They've also seen their prices come up a little bit, but we just saw, you're going to get any given slate performances like Ricochet the other day, where if you didn't have that value, forget it. It was gone, and that was a big value day on the slate. And he just kind of wiped out a lot of guys who underperformed. So there's going to be pieces like that. There's Trey up at the top of that team. On the Detroit side of things, there's Cade to consider. There's a Tobias Harris as a mid-range type of a play in a environment where he might be able to succeed. So we'll see what we got to with those guys, and then potentially missing Jalen Duren. You'll have some cheap value guys among the big men. Pacers and the Hornets, 235.5 point totals. Pretty appealing. Is that the highest on the... Yeah, that is the highest mark on the slate. Definitely some scoring upside there. We know who the players are at the top on both of those teams. We'll probably see some trickle down through the mid-range guys. Charlotte's still without most of their bigs, so we'll continue to see the impact of that. Indy, I'm sure we'll get to some Ben Mathurin. I'm not sure how much Nembhard we'll see, but those are the guys I have in mind typically when I'm talking about that team from the mid-range. So we'll definitely see some shares of them. The Nets, the Celtics, Nets 13-point dogs in Boston. That's an ugly point spread as far as the blowout potential there. Celtics still without Jaylen Brown. now without Luke Cornett as well. So again, we're going to have value at the center spot. We're probably going to have value in several different positions. Go lay down, buddy. And then the ongoing value that's created by Jaylen Brown being out, which just leads to Tatum being really good. Derek White continuing to look very good. Downstream impact to guys like Peyton Pritchard. So a lot of upside in that game. It's just you do have to fade a little bit of blowout risk there. The Nets have been hanging with some teams. They've been pretty decent in some games early on. It is a team, mostly composed of actual NBA talent right now. But that is a very, very big point spread against a very, very good team. Phoenix and Dallas, will look at the impact from in Dallas from the ongoing missing pieces and parts among their big men. Phoenix is just going to continue to provide the 3 stars, or the 2 stars in whatever we want to call Bradley Beal these days. All of those guys eat into one another when all 3 of them are active a little bit. So based on, as compared to like lifetime numbers, even last year's numbers to a degree, some production is down when all 3 of them are out there. But you do get the potential to pick off just, I have salary to spend. This is a good spot to grab some shares of a high-end guy. And as we've discussed on a bunch of different shows lately, you can go to those options when those guys are a little bit just generally low owned. If they're 8-10% owned, you can always grab a few shares. Or if you're at or about the field and you want to go up and over the field. Joker, can you go lie down, please? Just sitting behind me whining now for no good reason. What are you doing? Been hanging out all day. Are you jealous that I'm talking to the microphone? I know you don't understand that there's people out there listening. Poor guy. Anyway. So from Phoenix, we'll get to those guys. I doubt we see much downstream in Phoenix. We had a really good game from DeAndre Ayton. That was one of our hits the other day. It was basically him, Lillard, Giannis, and then a scramble for all the other guys. We'll see how Ayton came through with all the center options on this slate. I'm pretty sure he's going to get gobbled up, but he would be the other guy that maybe hits the board a little bit. Why am I talking about Ayton? He's not on the Suns anymore. My bad. That's what happens when I start talking to the dog midway through talking about the game and look for a place to claw back. Yeah, Ayton we'll talk about when we get to Portland. Sorry about that. Little brain skip there. Speaking of Giannis and Lillard, though, they're going to be facing the Knicks tonight. Giannis, as mentioned earlier, probable for this one on the back-to-back. That was something we brought up yesterday as a reason maybe he wouldn't go. Did go yesterday. Playing on a back-to-back against the Knicks. Should be a decent upside spot for some scoring on both sides. We've seen some disappointing Knicks like Jalen Brunson early in the season, but I continue to have total faith, even though he burnt me again the other day when I said that. I continue to have total faith in the upside of Brunson. There's minutes galore for the Knicks, especially if Campaign doesn't play. But you get the upside bump for the Knicks, top-end guys like Josh Hart. Anyway, those guys are always going to have 40-minute ceilings. On the Bucks side, I think you can go right back to Giannis and Lillard from the top, and then any other value probably just going to be created by missing bodies if that happens. Golden State and the Cavs, we saw Curry clear, 34 minutes in their last game, which was encouraging to see after they said he was going to play unrestricted minutes. We'll see what that is on an ongoing basis, though. Right now, again, everybody's been playing pretty conservative minutes on that team, and they're playing a deep rotation. So I don't love the Warriors, but with a 231-point total there's definitely going to see at least some shares going to some of those guys. Same thing on the Cavs. We've seen a lot of shares of Garland early on FanDuel because he's been cheap. We've seen some Donovan Mitchell pop up on both sides. Some of the big men pop up on both sides. But that's going to be, I don't know. I feel like that game's a little grindier maybe than that 231-point total might suggest. Feels a little bit high. Not that both teams can't score, but I don't know. I'm not completely sold on that game. Washington and Memphis, with all the value that's going to be created on the Memphis side, we're going to see a ton of Scottie Pippen on the FanDuel slate. We're going to see a ton of Jaren Jackson on both sides. Definitely an interesting game. The Wizards, there's always pieces from that team. They've been shorthanded for most of this season. We'll see where guys like Jordan Poole land. Just an Izudi is kind of a spot for him. I think I've got him under compared to where some other places do. 7-point spread in that one, but a 231-point total. Not bad to work with. 222 points between the Rockets and the Thunder. That's another one that could be a little bit grindy, defensively oriented. 8.5-point spread in OKC's favor makes a ton of sense. But there's some obvious options on both of those teams, from at the upper middle class level, let's say. Maybe we don't want to call them stars, with like the Jalens and the Chets of the world. And then on the Rocket side, the Şengüns, the Freddie Van Vliets and guys like that. Green a little bit as a scoring option. He's more of a pivot, like we talked about him, the context we talked about him in the other day if you were here. But there's some options in that one. That one's not a total skip over game for me at 222. 12-point spread between Portland and Minnesota. That's where we get to our potential Ayton spot. Going up against Gobert. Don't love that idea. Maybe we get to some Ant from the Minnesota side. Maybe we get to some odd DiVincenzo shares. He's another guy we always talk about in terms of when that three's falling, you can get upside from guys like that. And he hasn't really been hitting it early, and he hasn't really seen tons and tons of ownership on a big slate. He's a kind of guy from the mid-range that could slide through as an interesting player. On the Portland side, nothing really is leaping to mind. Maybe some odd little shares of like Anthony Simons, who's popped up here and there early in the season at a fair price. The Heat and Denver, you just have the interesting piece with Jokic, with Gordon and Murray both going to be out. Murray questionable, Gordon out. There's just tons of upside for Jokic to play maximum minutes at maximum potential. So we're always going to be considering that. Otherwise, Murray kind of muddies the waters around plays like Westbrook and the value guys there. Miami side, just the scraps of whatever you get from the top end, really. Philly and the Lakers, no Tyrese, could render Paul George a little bit interesting. And then no Embiid in a continued sense. It's a situation we've been dealing with. On the Lakers side, we've got AD is probable, so no injury concerns in an ongoing sense there. Would expect that he's going to be back, and it just puts them back in the normal situation. For the Lakers, they're favored by 7.5, 222.5 point total in that one. That one's just on FanDuel, so is the other California game. Clippers and the Kings. Definitely some high-end parts on the Kings that do come up a fair amount of the times on these FanDuel late slates, especially, or these FanDuel late games. The Clippers side, maybe we see some Harden creep through. I don't know that we're going to get to much else from the Clippers side of that one. It's kind of a medium-strength game at the end of the night, but you do have a couple teams implied for 115 on the upside of those two games, the two home teams. Definitely a lot to work with. OMG Lowe's, good day. Good to see you. Ducking's here. Stephen Cunningham. What's up, everybody? Let's get that money tonight, says Anthony Taylor. Cujo was here early. TGIF. Back at you, buddy. So let's get into this thing. Let me shrink the board down so you guys can actually see it a little better. Yo, Mamba season has officially started, says Mamba. Are you allowed to announce the start of your own season? Or is that something that somebody else has to declare? Let's see what this is. Hold on one second. Nah, it's nothing. Second place yesterday in the showdown. Nice, Mamba. Not bad, sir. Not bad at all. OMG Lil says, of course he can declare his own season. It's fair. I was thinking like a duck season, rabbit season kind of a sense. Typically they're going opposite ways. All right, let's get into this thing. As threatened. Ooh, let me hide this. That's the column you guys aren't supposed to see. That's just the one where the actual ownership is. All right, so as usual, I'm going to use as usual on these split slates, we're going to be sorted by this DraftKings top 150 exposure. And again, we're getting those color issues. That's fine. And then we're going to filter by FanDuel positioning just so we catch everybody, or as best we can. So let's jump in on guards. The good news at the guard position is there doesn't appear to be anybody relevant in those two FanDuel games. Norm Powell, 1% owned in the top 150, level with the field. I didn't have enough Norm Powell in a slate a week ago or so when I hit in the top 10. He would have been a difference maker at the same price as whatever other value guy I had in that one, or a similar price. At 63, I don't love him. He's a .77 guy last year on 19% usage. He's seen a usage spike in the situation he's playing in right now because they need scoring. 25.5%. So the bump up to 1.01 per minute so far this year, it's probably not completely real, but at least there's something to say like, well, that's at least part of why. That's going to change in the future. Right now, I would call him, more in the 0.9 and change range, which you can see 29 points in 33 and change minutes. We didn't give him the full one. There's a little bit there, and there could be a little bit potential more, because if he plays at this level, you get scoring beyond this. You get into the mid-30s as a median. So 1%, perfectly fine. 8%, you're okay. I wouldn't go beyond 10. Doesn't really look all that relevant. And then looks like we got like one share of Harden. We got no Oubre. We got no Fox. Both of those guys are, obviously below the field at those levels. But it doesn't look like either of those is a dramatic undercut to the field. We did get no Paul George, which is kind of interesting. I didn't really tweak Paul George all that much, despite the situation, just because of him coming in with, he's playing around 32, played just 24 or 23-6, but put up 37 points on the FanDuel scale the other day. So I just kind of split the difference and left his rates around where they just come up for, what was in there for the season. And I'm okay with that. But I don't want to leave it completely on the table if he starts getting projected up or projected out for a ton of ownership. So that's one to watch. If he starts to get a little bit popular, I would say, at least make sure that you have some shares. Because he does have the opportunity to just be the guy. Let me reload here and see what that ownership looks like right now. It's still, right now, it's just low single digits. It's really nothing to worry about. So I'm not sweating leaving it on the table the way it looks right now. Otherwise, doesn't look like there's anybody really worth sweating over. Malik Monk, D'Lo on potentially continuing reduced minutes. Kyle Lowry, nobody really pops. Lowry with a few additional minutes, a little bit more to do in this situation with no Maxey. Really nothing, didn't generate much. So nothing up there. Scrolling down for the guys who are on both slates now. TJ McConnell popping for an odd amount of value. I wasn't really expecting that one. Do I have him a little bit high? I got him just at 20 minutes. 113 player. He's questionable today, too. So, don't get carried away with that. But let me see where I got him on. I have him. Below last year. A little bit above this year. But not much. Got him like halfway in between these numbers. He's playing a little bit more usage, 23.1%. That's up from 22.9. We're talking about 2/100ths of or 2/10ths rather of a percent of usage. Production's dipped at 113. But he's been a significant 1+ player for a number of years. I don't really have an issue. I'm not going all the way to this 130. But if you wanted to knock him down a peg, it does look like we're getting quite a bit of him on DraftKings. Not that it's dramatically above where the field is at. It's above, but he's not a straight line up. Last time out, played just 16-6. Put up 21-5. He's playing just 17 minutes on average, but they're still shorthanded. DK, let's see what that ownership looks like. See, we're 10, 15 points above the field there. If you wanted to shave that down a little bit, you'd be sacrificing whatever edge you're essentially buying with it. It's just a cheap spot. But it is only 20 minutes, and again, he is questionable. So it's a shaky position right now that just kind of came through the sim. Cade Cunningham, definitely a more realistic piece. 8,900 on FanDuel didn't really land that strong. 14% level with the field. He's fine. On DraftKings, though, he hit pretty hard. 34%. Significantly above the field, it looks like. We also got that result on a $3,800 Cody Martin. Cody's putting up 0.84 so far this season per minute. 0.80 last year. That's FanDuel scale, but 0.84 so far this year on DraftKings. 15% usage this year, 15.7% last year. This is the kind of game you're going to get. 27.6 minutes, put up 19.3 FanDuel points. He's going to go back exactly to that level of production. For 3,800, that's workable. There's enough with a couple of additional points in there that he can just be a value square for you and forklift your ownership in your shares into better position there. So he's a good value square over here. He's not as big one here at 43. Small forward and shooting guard, though, probably works for him a little bit positionally. So 22% slightly above the field here, but 34% significantly above for the 3,800 over here on DraftKings is really interesting. And then 87 on Cade. I don't totally love Cade in this spot. 1.23 per minute on DraftKings this year, 116 on FanDuel. 30% usage, slightly up from last year. Again, he's perfectly fine. But like the way he's priced, I feel like he's projected a little bit not high. I think it's the right spot to have him. But how many times in this matchup is Cade going for 65, you know? There's a lot. It's a big slate, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't know how he bounces off the top end players. Obviously, he did in the sim. He comes up quite a bit. Derek White, who I mentioned, still benefiting from that Jaylen Brown absence. It's up to 75, both guard spots on FanDuel. We got him at 18%, but below the field a little bit over there. At 7,200 or 7,200, I should emphasize the correct number. Both guard spots on DraftKings, 32.6% of the time and above the field. Nice piece on the DraftKings slate. Solid, mid-range type option with a realistic ceiling into the mid-50s. Especially in a game where they're favored pretty dramatically. The one thing, again, that you could get with Boston is some of those guys end up sitting the fourth quarter. They empty the bench. They start to focus on the other players on this team. They know what Derek White is. And they don't have like a ton of developmental guys or anything, but they have gone on record in the past saying like, hey, we use these soft games to, kind of work up the rest of our team. Mathurin, like I mentioned, I was expecting to see him. This is right around where I figured we'd have him. 26%, basically level with the field on FanDuel. 30% above the field a little bit on the DraftKings slate. It's been a 0.97 per minute player on DraftKings at 5,400. Shooting guard and small forward. That works a little bit better than his 0.92 at the same positioning for 55 on FanDuel is. He's a good, not great, 1 in 4 kind of a play on FanDuel. Just like we got him, just like the field's getting to him, I think. We might even be a slight undercut there. This is just a bit better of a value play. The 5.45, closing in on that 5.5 that we're looking for. I don't mind that spot. As long as he's going to continue getting those minutes. He played 33.9 the other day, put up a 35.7. It's an okay mid-game that doesn't totally destroy you, but it's obviously not giving you the upside that you're looking for. But he's got a little bit of that. Brandon Boston is picking up a ton of shares on both sites, especially on FanDuel, most notably 53% over there. He's one of the higher-owned players on that slate. That is still above the field. But it's not, again, a straight line up. It's not like what we're getting with Scottie Pippen. This is double plus the Scottie ownership. So assume that means that this is less than double. Oops, where was I? That is less than double the Boston ownership. I would say he's probably 35 or so without looking at it. But definitely an interesting piece at 46. New Orleans, as you heard, without a ton of guys in an ongoing sense. He played 38-4 the other day. He put up 26.9 FanDuel points. He's been at .90 for the season. In and out of minutes. 23.5 on average over 6 games that he's played. Last season, he was getting more usage when he played. Different situation. 24% usage. That has gone down in the situations he has played this year to just 17.7. But if he just gets out there at these cheap prices, makes a few buckets, we're pretty much home. So not really sweating it. I think there's more than enough minutes there, and this usage could potentially go up, and he can succeed on that 18%. It's just average usage. Just make a couple shots. He's an okay facilitator. Jaden Ivey's coming up a little bit on both sites. Basically level with the field on the FanDuel slate at 35, level with the field on the DraftKings slate at 20%. Just kind of looks like who he is. 6,300 across sites. There's going to be more to do for everybody in Detroit. But, again, kind of like with Cunningham, I'm not completely wild about the spot. He's a decent usage guy, mid-20s usage over the last 2 seasons. He's been at .97 so far this year. He's put up a couple of solid scores. The other day he was right around a point per minute, but he's got upside beyond that. I think 2 days before he was at like 38 in similar minutes. He's coming up a decent amount more than my guy Jalen Brunson here. Jalen at just 8,800 feels really appealing. In 36.8 the other day, he put up just 27.6 FanDuel points. Continues to be a bit underproductive. On similar shots, it's not a dramatic reduction. 1.07 per minute so far, down from 1.24. 57% true shooting, 28.8% assist, 3.9% rebounding rate so far. He's dropped, I think they were saying like a free throw attempt per game early in the season. Impacts him a little bit. But you got to think as the season goes on, it's going to be the Jalen and Karl Anthony Towns show as far as the scoring on that team goes. And Jalen's going to revert back to his getting to the line frequently, being aggressive in the paint. And that little floater is going to fall a little bit more than it did early in the season. So I'm comfortable going back to the well. And honestly, at 12%, if that's level with the field, if you want a few more shares, it is an upside player. I won't say he's a superstar, but it's an upside player for sure. I think he proved that. 19%, we're already above the field. This is kind of the territory I'm talking about over here. If you wanted to take him up into this kind of trajectory and get a little bit further ahead of the field, I think that's okay. Luka's looking like a pretty key piece on FanDuel, though. 32%. That's got to be our highest owned superstar, I would think, on a 13-game slate. 145 so far this season out of Luka versus 164 last year. 34.1% usage, down from 35.5 last year, but can shoot right back and beyond that on any slate that he wants to. Monster assist rates, excellent rebounder for a guard. What more can I say about Luka Doncic? 149 per minute on the DraftKings slate. We got him at 15%, about half the exposures we got on FanDuel. 11.6 over there versus the 11.5, so there's a different impact for the price against the cap, and that positioning is working out differently. Curious. Just in terms of our top price, look like we got a pretty decent split between Jokic shares and Luka shares there among the top price. And then, yeah, Giannis trailing among the three $11,000 superstars on DraftKings. We got basically even-ish shares. We'll get to Jokic in a little bit. 18% of him, 15% of Luka, and then we dip all the way down like just 2% of Giannis on that slate. Always interesting to compare those things across whatever category. HBO's on over here. It's been binging Silicon Valley the last 2 days. Funny show. If you've never watched it, definitely a funny show. Trailed off down toward the end. We're at the end of their, I think, last season right now. But it's a good one to pop on, binge through. It's like a half-hour comedy. It's easy to get through. Amen Thompson, no love at all on FanDuel. We got him 12% of the time as just an interesting value square that fits both in guards and forward spots, point guard and small forward eligibility. Just makes him a little bit unique to shuffle around the board as far as that positioning goes. You've got other point guard small forwards here, though, like Andre Jackson. Presumably stepping back into mid-20s minutes, played 28-3 last night, put up 28-6. Going to be going up against better defenders. 4,100, we really didn't get him very much on FanDuel on the much, much bigger slate. On DraftKings, we did get him 9% of the time, but that's an undercut to the field at 3,400. We got more of, and we got more relative to the field, of a $4,700 Amen Thompson. So it's just interesting how that speaks to how that money's being spent. We did get $3,800 Cody Martin up here in that same positioning as well, and we got him 34% of the time and heavy against the field. So that might just be occupying most of these shares, and that's not quite making the same value return. This is a 609 value score versus a 5.41. Still good, though. And honestly, as a piece that you want to, if you're looking for pivots away from, if you're getting a lot of Cody Martin, if you're getting a lot of, Boston's a different kind of play. If you're getting a lot of Amen Thompson and you want to get a little bit cheaper and a little bit lower owned, then you can pivot to the lower single digit or thereabouts owned Andre Jackson. He's got the opportunity to come out and put up a similar type performance. So far this year in his full role, which is just 14 and change minutes a night after last night's uptick, 0.84 per minute, low usage guy. Last year in the, I won't say more complete season because it wasn't a ton of minutes as the season went on, but 0.65 per minute on 9.7% usage. So if you do make that pivot, know that you don't necessarily expect to go back to even that 28 points, that per minute one per minute performance. Hard undercut to Carrington. Still got him 14% of the time on FanDuel, but that's a pretty firm undercut there. 9% of the time, pretty firm undercut on DraftKings as well. He's been a 0.85 per minute player on 14.5% usage this season. Just make sure we're not a little under. Yeah, that's just a big ownership projection. Kind of surprised. I am right at what he's been doing, 0.84. I really don't see much justification to give him much more than that. Let me see. Man, I don't know. I don't love pushing him up beyond what he's really been doing. He's just getting a really meaty ownership projection. Again, he's coming up fine. He's a 5+ value play already over here at his 0.84, 0.85. He's a 5 over here. Again, on DraftKings, typically we are looking for like 5.5. That's why we got less of him and probably a little bit of a harder undercut to the field. But he's projected to be owned in the 20s on both sites. And I guess we got the little bit above per minute there. 1 per minute there. I don't want to get stuck for too long on Carrington here, but is that this game? So that 33 minutes, I was against the Warriors too. Not like a slouch team. How was he in the game before that? This is when I wish I had updated the last 3 games sheet that I have in here, but I didn't update it today. I guess maybe I could give him a little nudge. Again, I don't want to do it just because he's popular. I'm trying to see if there's enough justification for that popularity to tell me that I should. We definitely have been closer to a point per minute in these 3 games. All right, you might see a little bit of an uptick for Bub in the next update. I will reluctantly acknowledge that he's been a little bit more productive in these last 3 games, so he probably deserves a little bit more. I don't think I'm going to take him all the way to a point per minute, though. I might put him in like the low 9s, which would be, call it right around 30, and I'm really not comfortable with that. Yeah. Call it 29. I'm going to highlight him in the other sheet so that I remember to keep tinkering with it. You'll see him a little bit more. I do think it's probably justified to get him a little bit beyond this again, but just barely. And could be a mistake if you want to just consider these. That way you have a little bit of them, but you're decently undercut to the field. I do think that that is the ongoing position. Just giving him an additional point and change here. Like 2 points, really. I don't know that it's going to suddenly thrust him into so much more against the field there. It's an interesting spot, though. Some single-digit guys. Brendan Miller. It's kind of an is who he is game. Looks a little better on DraftKings. A 5 value score over there. We got him 9% of the time, but below the field. Booker, like I mentioned, does have topside star caliber scoring potential on any given slate. He's just been at 1.09 so far this year. This is the impact I'm talking about from all 3 guys. You do see a little bit of a haircut for each of them, but there's always the ability for each of them to get back to the 1.2s for Durant, like the 1.4s on any given slate. And at worst, you're getting a good, the bottom end is typically this, the point per minute output. And typically you're getting around that, the 1.23 or the one, this is the 1.09 this year. So these are high-end guys that despite coming up just in the single digits for us and level with the field, whenever we get these primo players in that kind of a position, those are spots to keep in mind that I can land shares there and I can be gaining against the field on a guy who is a good player, even though he's not necessarily mathing out to those numbers. I do know that ceiling exists for that player. I can get to that spot and just take a little bit of a position against the field there. So I think he's worth keeping in mind. KD as well. Beal a lot less so as far as those Phoenix guys. Kennard, not a play on FanDuel, 0% at 3,900. At 3,200, he got into a few DraftKings lineups. I wouldn't expect much. He played 18 in his return, put up 10.2 FanDuel points. I've got him at 20 minutes in that extremely shorthanded situation from Memphis. He's going to have to play. 20, 22 is probably correct. So he's just a square. He's just a building block over here. But it is fair enough to put him in some lineups, and he is another guy that rotates into some of those cheapo spots that we were talking about there. As mentioned, Garland, in the run-up when I was talking about Cleveland saying I wasn't sure what we would really see, Garland's a guy we got a lot of at these lower prices on FanDuel. He's 68 now, 69 on DraftKings, so that's up a little bit. Just 6% below the field here, 5% below the field there. Reasonable enough to kick him back up, say the field's at 10, 12 against these numbers on both sites. Reasonable to kick him up into that range to get even with the field. And he's good enough to pay that off. I don't think that's a spot where I would say, you can go claw back a position that's larger than the field. That feels like it would be a bit of a mistake. Lou Dort, kind of a low-end guy. Low usage, can create fantasy points. He's at 0.91 so far this season, despite seeing 2 points less usage than what he put up 0.73 on. Not really a shot taker. But a guy who can definitely create you some fantasy points at 42. Shooting guard and small forward eligibility. Just a value square to move around a little bit. But another one of those guys. Competitive for value shares. And when you can move pieces around for, from here with the 32, the 42, 34 there. Some of these other guys that are hitting the board a little bit. 44, 38, 41. Those are spots where, even though we're getting most of our shares up here, and those are the guys that we're getting the biggest edge against the field on, you can take some of these shares and invest them into some of the guys that are down here in just the lower single digits. Because once we're talking about a $3,800 guy, KCP goes out there and comes up with 2 extra steals today and makes 1 extra bucket, and all of a sudden he's blowing the doors off of somebody that's up here as far as his actual output at that salary. So you can always make those value pivots. It's kind of similar to the stars when there's this many similarly super cheap squares on DraftKings. You can kind of make those pivots in similar fashion. Scottie Pippen is a world beater on FanDuel today at 6,000. We've seen Scotty's output when he steps into these roles, and Ja's out today. Got Scotty at 31 minutes. 1.07 per minute so far this season on 18.9 on 22.7 last season. He was at 1.10, and we know he's got upside beyond that on any given slate. 25.6 the other day, put up 29.2 FanDuel points. Very happy to get Scotty around this level. Again, this is 2.5 times the field or so. On DraftKings, he did not come up. 6,500, different price fit at the position over there. Remember, we got all these value guys to work with through that guard spot. So really different price play across sites. The minutes are going to be there. The potential for production is going to be there. But it doesn't really hit the board in the same way. 3% hard undercut to the field. Now that hard undercut on DraftKings is against ownership that is, say, what did I say we got, 3%? Let's call it about 5 times that. I don't want to completely give it away. So it's not like he's getting 50, 60% ownership and we're getting 3. But this is significantly under where the field is, as represented by that. Tyrese, much better play on FanDuel, 8,100. We did get him both guard spot eligibility. Should be a soft enough matchup against Charlotte. 1.02 is way down from 1.38 last year. If I can find this guy, though, that's an interesting enough option. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 lineups on FanDuel. I don't know that I would take him too far north of the field here. I think he's a good play to have right around that level with the field, 20, 25% at most, and really not push your luck with it. But there's definitely upside, compared to what we've gotten from him so far this year. On DraftKings, it's another one. 2.6% and an undercut to the field that looks like the same undercut there, so call it 2.6 against 10, 12. For 81 on DraftKings, he's just not a good price fit. Donovan Mitchell also fell into that. 8,200 both guard spots, 2%. That's closer to the field. Between the two guys, 80 to 100 more for Mitchell, but you do buy a little bit of flexibility around that shooting guard spot. But comparing him to Halliburton, he's projected a little bit higher, a little bit better of a value score. Our 2.6 is closer to the field, so presumably, the field is, I don't know, let's call it 7 or 8%, where it's 10 or 12% maybe here. This would be my favored position between the two to try and grab a few additional shares. I think that makes sense to take the guy who's at the lower overall field ownership if you're going to push one of those two guys who came up in matching shares in the sim, where one is saying, hey, undercut this guy more dramatically to the field, and it's not as dramatic with this one. That's the guy, the one who's less dramatically under the field is the guy that you want to take upward, typically, if you're looking at a comparison like that. Peyton Pritchard, fine with potential upside to play a couple of additional minutes. I've already got him at 30. Make a couple of shots, though, and play, 32, 34 in a blowout, maybe. Maybe we see a few additional points. Didn't really come up as a huge piece, though. Everybody else over on DraftKings is lowish single digits. These are two undercuts to the field. Steph, 1.3%. Figure the field's 5.8, somewhere around there. Same thing with Alvarado. On FanDuel, neither one of those guys came up all that relevant either. Alvarado is going to be playing, shorthanded ball with New Orleans. Steph did go back again 34 minutes the other night, put up a solid Steph game, 60.9 FanDuel points. He's been at 1.52 per minute this season. I gave him 32. A little bit of faith in the idea that they'll keep him above 30. But that is a team that is running depth this season and limiting minutes. So a little bit, not concerned, that's the wrong word, but I'm okay with being in the low single digits on Steph. It's a player you can always grab more of at 8,600, though. Nembhard, significantly lower owned at a cheap price than where we're seeing Mathurin. He's a much lower end per minute guy. 0.78 per minute, 0.67 this year. Mathurin's in the 0.9s somewhere. 0.92 this year. So it's a very different player. The minute situation is going to be the same. He's coming in at a very different price point. We've seen him more relevant this season, though. Doesn't look like a key piece. A couple shares here, a couple shares there. He is a 5.5 plus value player on DraftKings. So it's another guy to, and 5.30 on the FanDuel slate as well. It is another guy to at least keep in mind if you are rotating out a lot of value out of the more highly owned guys. Or if you're building a oddball lineup and you just want to make a differentiated play. He's not presenting that much of a different value proposition than some of those guys up there are. So there's enough there that you could rotate to a few shares, but the sim is pretty strongly telling us don't get carried away on that. Terry Rozier, Koulibaly, those guys looking like who they are. We did get a little bit of Clay on FanDuel as an outlier. 10% here. We got none of him on DraftKings. 5,100 on the FanDuel slate with forward and guard eligibility. Not bad. He's just been a low-end version of himself now. 0.80 per minute this season. The usage is down 5 points from what he was getting at Golden State last year. Definitely some opportunity, though. There's a pretty big chunk of just free-floating opportunity in Dallas right now. So he could go out there and seize it on any given slate, but put up just 20.7 in 24.8 minutes in this exact situation the other day. Dyson Daniels not really hitting the board for value. He's just more one of the reasons, that those Detroit guards are not necessarily popping off the page as far as that game environment goes. Anthony Edwards, another star where you can definitely muscle up a few more than 0 shares and a few more than 3.3% shares. Ant's got big ceiling on any given slate. That said, we've been at 111 this year, down from 121 last year. FanDuel scoring 119 DraftKings. But superstar potential, priced a little bit lower than some comparable upside superstars. Trey, SGA, onesie twosie shares on FanDuel. We didn't get him at all on DraftKings. Jordan Poole, 4%, pretty hard undercut to the field on FanDuel. 0 and a hard undercut to the field on DraftKings. Again, this is not going to be a gigantic field number. It's just how that 0 is bouncing off of it. But let's see, the 4% of them we got, that's 3-ish. The field is like 3-ish times that. So it's an undercut for sure. That's a player who can go out and burn you on the wrong day as far as those undercuts go. He kind of did so the other day if you weren't on him. 33 and change minutes, put up 49.7 FanDuel points. He has been good this year in terms of a per minute player. 1.30 on 26.9% usage. Just such a, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but a big time roller coaster player. So you got to know that you got to take the bad with the good with Jordan Poole when you play him. But he's been showing a lot more of the good this season than he was last year. So there's definitely spikeable upside, but the sim is kind of loudly screaming at us like, let the field have it. That's typically my approach to Jordan Poole. LaMelo and Lillard I'd rather have some shares of. Both of those are more painful undercuts, but neither guy really hitting the position all that well at where they're priced. Either one of those guys has big-time potential as far as their per-minute output, as far as what their ceilings look like. Both guys have been good this year. Both guys have excellent 30+% usage. Nothing wrong with a few shares of LaMelo. Nothing wrong with a few shares of Lillard. No Simons across sites. None of anybody else here across sites. Looks like Garrison Matthews got a little bit of a haircut to the field at his 0% exposure for 33, but he's just another and the lowest end of a ongoing list of $3,000 value guys, $4,000 value guys on DraftKings. So that's the only reason he got any field ownership at all. DB loves Lamp. Who's the better spot? Scotty or Boston on FanDuel? It's probably Scotty. That's close, but we did get more Scotty, and we got more against the field of Scotty. Scotty comes up as a better value score overall. My real answer would probably be both. I'd put one in point guard. I'd put the other one in shooting guard because that's what their positions are. And I would continue building that lineup. I think they're both good value squares. And we got to significant shares of both. If I resort this by FanDuel exposure, they're two of our top exposed players overall in the top 150 on FanDuel. They are our top 2 exposed players overall on FanDuel. So real answer and, heavy air quotes, correct answer, both. If I have to choose one, Scotty. DB's not a sarcastic person. He really loves lamps. Tyrese is a good FanDuel play. Let's get it. Tyrese Halliburton, I assume. Tyrese Maxey was the other one that sprang to mind. And I was like, no, he's not. I was getting ready to argue that, and I was like, wait, he's probably talking about a different guy. Yeah, look, Halliburton's right there. He's coming up just fine on FanDuel. 22.6%. He's a 5+ value, 40+ projection, both guard spots, 8,100. Good matchup against Charlotte. The production's just been, the power's been out a little bit. 36 and change minutes the other day, 28 FanDuel points. At 81, that is not paying your bills. But we know that the upside is in the 1.3 plus range. Nearly 1.4 last year. And above, that's just his average. So yeah, tons and tons of any given slate upside for Halliburton for sure. And a play I'll have. I will have a chunk of Halliburton. It's just he's more around the field than he is like aggressively ahead of the field. He can ball. Absolutely. Yep. No arguing there. Powers here, fashionably late, as usual. Paul's playing 100% Boston. Still playing Andre Jackson. Yeah, again, Paul Ezeki there. I don't dislike the Andre Jackson situation. I don't think it's necessarily that much different from what he had in front of him yesterday. So he has the potential to go right back to that output. I wouldn't go into it expecting him to go back to a point per minute, which is what he gave you in 38 minutes last night. But if you go into it expecting, the 0.85 range, what do I have? Let me see what I gave him before I even say that. See what I actually put him at. Yeah, so it was a 0.67-ish. There he is. We talked about him just a minute ago. 0.65 on the FanDuel scale last year. He's been at 0.84 in his limited action this season. It was 28 minutes, not 38 minutes. 28 minutes last night, 28.6 FanDuel points. Getting him back to that level is a win. If you get him to play 28 minutes, which he's the more likely scenario is the 28 minutes, not the 28 FanDuel points. If you get that, that's a major win. And he is capable of it, as he just demonstrated yesterday. I will say that, man for man, Knicks probably better defenders. So, the potential to shut him down a little bit more there, but that's not exactly who they're going to be keying on in that game either. So, yeah, more than enough potential. And the good news is if we're talking DK, he doesn't need to go back to 28 points. He doesn't need to give you a point per minute at 3,400. You'd like him there. But he went through the Sims. He came up 9% of the time below the field with an 18.4 projection that's given him a 5 and change value score. So you get the upside of a couple standard deviation and a half. Gets you back to that 28-ish. You get a 2 standard deviation game, you're laughing your way to the bank. But even if he comes in around the median, you're not completely shot in the foot at those prices. That's just building block stuff. So, yeah, perfectly fine. Just didn't come through the math quite as strong because there's so many other guys that are priced at that range, below that range, etc. But viable for sure. Let's get back to our conversation here. Resort by DraftKings again, and then we'll filter down for FanDuel positioning. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe. Going a little long here already. Didn't realize that. Was I just talking for like an hour about guards? Maybe we're just waiting for an hour for the goddamn column to sort. Come on, Excel. Work with me here. It's all those empty squares, yeah. All right. Let's get to the forwards. So, yeah, hit the like button. Subscribe so that you know when shows go live. We're going to be doing the NFL main slate show during the day tomorrow like we did last week, but I'll try and plan it a little bit better so that I'm not trying to cram it into just the 2 hours that I have before I have to get back to NBA pre-lock. So keep an eye out for that. It's only 10 games on the NFL main slate this week. I'm going to be writing the full game notes article overnight tonight. That'll be up. All the projections are up for NFL. The rankings are up. Projections for this NBA slate are up. Just 4 games for hockey tonight, but those projections are up as well with all the line combinations that you need to know who you want to stack. All the starting goaltenders as were confirmed at least a couple hours ago. So check all that stuff out at Roto Scouts. Access to all of those pieces of content, every single projection for all 3 of those sports, every single main slate, and for football, every single showdown slate, under $1 a day, all in, for access to all that. Also, check out our guys over at acemine.io. They do great work for sims and for optimizers. That's what we're running these sims in. My projections running in their tool, and that's where we get these great results. So let's talk through forwards. For a change, we're not getting a big outlier Domantas Sabonis share. The other day, we had him like 60-something% when he was on the FanDuel only. Today, 6.6%, level with the field. Easily, in my mind, a good enough player. You want to grab a few additional shares. For one, just to have in your pocket. Late night hammer kind of a guy. But for 2, does put a big salaried player into more lineups late, which gives you more pivotability. You always want to have mid-range guys, which will come up more through natural process, as well as a few higher salaried guys. And you want to be able to make 2 changes in any given lineup if you're deliberately leaving shares for late. If you're just leaving one, well, for one thing, you could get locked out. Everything else locks at 9, and you've got a 10 o'clock guy that you can pivot, and that doesn't really buy you anything. So you need that second spot anyway, but you need to consider what the salary ranges are. If you got two guys who are around the same salary, it's not going to gain you much if a sudden value opens up and you can pivot. If you've got the top owned guy with nobody above him and a salary opens up, then there's nothing. You gain 1,000 against the cap. There's nowhere to go. Right? So it is always good to have guys like that. And on that late slate, specifically on FanDuel, if you've got shares of Sabonis, and I don't specifically have anybody in mind who like might scratch and not play or whatever. But let's say you had those shares of Sabonis and something changed and opened up a value guy where, all right, I can pivot out of my, let's just imagine I had Caleb Martin shares down to Yabusele shares. Again, totally hypothetical, just looking at names and those prices. Now I've opened up a couple G's that I can go, all right, maybe I want to pivot some of those bonus shares up to Anthony Davis now because I've got multiple spots open. So always be thinking about your positioning as you're leaving those room for your late swaps. Outside of those kind of situations, though, honestly, from a group of pretty good players, nobody really hitting the board that hard in those separate FanDuel games. Sabonis, 6%, the most highly owned. DeRozan, 3.3. Never a huge fan of DeRozan. He's capable enough, but I just don't love the nature of the player. He's always basically priced for what he is in that 8,000, low 8s, high 7s kind of range. Doesn't show a ton of value. AD and LeBron, more than capable of sealing games on any given slate. This season so far, it's been more particularly AD. 161 per minute. He's one of the more dominant players on the board, but didn't come up a ton. 5.3% despite having center and power forward. So interesting results there for him. And then LeBron just 3%. But either one of those guys and Sabonis, feel free to grab additional shares. Triple J, pretty monstrous piece on both sides. 7,700 power forward and center eligible on FanDuel, gobbling up 60+% of our shares and not that far ahead of the field. I think it was like 50, high 50s, 58, something like that. On DraftKings, he's a little bit below the field. It was similar for the public ownership over there. 7,200 power forward only, just under 50% and a little bit below the field. If you want to take him to the field level on either site, no issues. If you want to be a little below, a little above, no issues. Looks like a very solid piece. 120 last year, 119 this year, despite a usage reduction in his limited minutes. The other day, played 32-1, 36.7 FanDuel points. We've got plenty of upside in the matchup to that and beyond as far as the ceiling goes. And again, just with all the missing pieces and parts from Memphis, he's got no choice other than to be the man if they're going to be remotely competitive in this game. Grant Williams, that shorthanded situation in the front court for Charlotte is creating havoc as far as this value goes. 4,900 on FanDuel, power forward and center eligible, puts him in a 5.34 value score. We only got him 6% of the time. I'm kind of okay with that. 13 and change usage this year, 15 and change last year, 0.74 last year, 0.79 this year. It is a much more important piece to the DraftKings slate the way it looks. A 6+ value score, 38% of the exposure in our top 150, and a pretty significant chunk above the field. And it's the same thing for Cody Martin, who we talked about during the guards breakdown. 30 and 28 minutes for those players. I don't love either option in a per minute sense. I don't love burying a ton of shares in lineups that have both of those guys. Probably more independent of one another, I would look to those guys. And that's not necessarily like they'll necessarily eat into one another's value that much, as there's so many other value spots on the board that I don't know that I want to sink 2 value shares into any one of these given situations. So probably separating those guys a little bit, good idea. But significant shares of both and significantly above the field on both. Tari Eason came up similarly. We got him once on FanDuel, not at all relevant at 55. He's a $4,300 piece at both forward spots on DraftKings. An entirely different kind of play. 4.57 value score on FanDuel, 5.69 on DraftKings. We got him 32% of the time. That's above the field, but not dramatically. It's not a straight up line, so figure the field's in the 20, 20-25% range. Big piece on DraftKings for sure, with a little bit of potential. He's been playing at a 1.15 level so far this year. It's just in 21.2 minutes a night over 8 games. But that's a little bit of an uptick. On the FanDuel scale, that's up to 1.24, up from 1.19 last year. That's on slightly less usage in the minutes that he's played. Part of that was elevated by that one monster performance that he had. So definitely, again, some small sample stuff still going on with some of these guys when we look into these numbers. But NBA, we do want to, much more so than like baseball or a sport like that, we're immediately, if you notice, talking about this season. But you do have to be wary that sometimes you can run into things like that where there is a little bit of skew. But he was a good per minute guy at 119 throughout last year. Mathurin, we've talked about. Franz Wagner coming up in a is who he is kind of situation. Definitely got a chunk of them on FanDuel, though. 43%. 7,800 at both forward spots. Totally viable. 26% over here at 8,000. Just a different price proposition on either site. So much more relevant to the FanDuel slate. But we're essentially level with the field on both sites. So he doesn't really stand out in either situation. I'd honestly rather be playing on this situation where I can have him 26% and be level rather than having to get up to the 43. I would be maybe a little bit more inclined toward the undercut on FanDuel. Have a ton, but if they're at 43, 45, and this is telling me just be around there, I'd also be comfy at 35 and let the field have that and take my 10% to spread out a little bit. But Franz is undeniably a good player. 116 per minute this season on increased usage so far in that shorthanded spot in Orlando. 43.6 in 39.4 minutes the other day. No issues with the play, but not my favorite guy to get like crazy overextended on like that when he's just kind of showing his basically normal self. Again, Izui is kind of a spot. I don't think it's a standout situation for him right now, but could be a very viable option. Or exactly what he looks like. Sometimes these results I could just let speak for themselves a little bit more, I guess. Josh Hart coming up like a moderate piece on FanDuel. A lot more interesting on DraftKings. 20% owned, above the field on a slight angle there. KD coming up as the most interesting piece from Phoenix. A little bit more than what I was talking about as far as being there to have as a star with upside. We're getting him 14.6% of the time, nearly 15% of the time, and above the field on the DraftKings slate. I'm kind of intrigued by that for DK. I've got him pulling a ton of minutes because he's playing a ton of minutes. Averaging 39 over his 8 games so far this season. Played 37-2, put up 46.1 FanDuel points the other day. Again, we are dealing with a haircut from his 1-2-3 last year. We're down at 1-1-2. But he's not a bad price fit for that at 8,600 power forward only on DraftKings. Still $9,000 on FanDuel. Some good back and forth going on in the chat. Should be under on Triple J because his minutes are capped. I don't know if that's going to matter. I've got him at 32. It's exactly what he played the other day. He put up 36.7. He's capable of putting up beyond that. Yeah, I don't know that I'd really sweat minutes because the price is just kind of in the right spot for the situation. So if you want to, again, you are getting an undercut to the field on DraftKings already in our sim results. So no real argument with it there. And at 62%, this is responding, by the way, to something that Power said in the chat. if you wanted to do the same on FanDuel, it's not like the field is telling you that you have to. I mean, it is because he's in 62% of our top 150, but that's where the field is. So the sim is telling you that there is a little wiggle room underneath that if you want to, but that's more going off the path deliberately. So, just kind of know what angle you're taking there. But I wouldn't necessarily do it on spec about the minutes. There's Najee. I was wondering where he was going to land. 4,500, Najee Marshall, the value play of the day the other day that completely failed. Ended up playing 21.4 minutes and putting up 17.4 FanDuel points. That's kind of an is output, honestly, from Najee. That's not far off the mark. He's a 0.87 per minute player this year, 0.85 per minute last year. So it's just, those expectations can get a little high for some of these cheap guys when they do start pulling a little bit of minutes. But again, it is fairly short-handed in Dallas. I've got full expectations of him going out there and at least attempting to play well enough to keep him on the court for 30-ish minutes. He's a very low usage guy, though, but he hits that small forward position pretty well on FanDuel. That's an interesting just construction point as far as the FanDuel slate goes, and I don't mind getting him at that level. Jake LaRavia at 4,900 with both forward spots gives you a little bit of value there too. If you've got the additional 400 to spend, that's not a bad pivot at slightly lower ownership. Neither one of those guys hit DraftKings at all. They're both viable enough. Mid fives as far as the value. Again, we're looking for 5.5 plus, but this at least puts them on the board for a couple of shares, which is almost exactly where we got them. But neither one is a dramatic undercut to the field, so the field not there. If you're wanting to grab a couple additional shares just as a value pivot at some similarly priced guys up that way, those are guys to at least consider, keep in mind as far as guys that you can do that into. Everybody else here is pretty low single digits. We do have a hard undercut to Sam Hauser on DraftKings, 4.67, so figure that's probably half. 3,600 both forward spots. I've got him projected for 22.5 minutes. It's about what he's been playing. He's a good player with a little bit of upside who could play a few additional minutes in the right situation. But not really showing a ton of ceiling right now. So I'm perfectly fine if we get him 5% thereabouts and under the field. The guy that's showing the value, and if that could change, by the way, if watch Boston starters, that could definitely change because, again, Cornette's out, so we'll see what they do. But Ket is probably going to be in that starting lineup, and that's going to be the guy who in a second is going to show us that value. But if they go a different way, which they're prone to do, Hauser could completely change at that price. Isaiah Stewart is another one I was kind of looking to eyeball here. Center and power forward on FanDuel, center only on DraftKings. Didn't really get him much. Remember, this is with Duren out. I've got him at 28 minutes. He played 26 the other night. That's up from his 20-minute average. Put up nearly a point per minute. He's been at nearly a point per minute for the season on just 10% usage, 14.3% last year. Obviously not a big shot taker. He's a creator of fantasy points, or a collector of fantasy points, rather. But at a $4,300 price, a 5.5 plus value score, I was curious to see him bounce off the field. And we're below. The field probably 3x that number. Let's see what the most current number is for him. It's a relevant guy to talk about because I do think people will get there just on instinct with the changing situation. Yeah, the public ownership is almost dead on like 3x the number that we got to. If you wanted to make that more like half, then fine. I don't know that I'd even take him up as far north as the field. I just think you're probably extracting more value from the other positions we've seen already or the other guys that we've already seen at this position. So I'm not sure how much Stewart you really need. And on FanDuel, he's not really all that relevant despite having the power forward eligibility. So again, Najee and LaRavia much more relevant on FanDuel. And then Pascal Siakam, 16% level with the field on FanDuel Everybody else is just onesie, twosie shares, including Giannis. That is not a player to ignore. That's a player that, as you're building lineups, if you want to pivot out shares from the other superstars, that's obviously a guy you can spend some money on any given slate. He's got monster upside. Should be able to score at will. There's nothing stopping him in this matchup. The defenders are not going to be going against him necessarily here. So I just kind of temper my expectations on the back-to-back with the question mark yesterday. He's probable today. I fully expect him to be out there. If Giannis doesn't play, I do think that Portis situation just is another one to continue going back to. He's priced at 79 FanDuel, but 7,000 on DraftKings. We didn't get him at all in the is what he is situation. But if you don't get Giannis, then a $7,000 Bobby Portis, always motivated to play against the Knicks if you like added narrative, is an upside player for sure in that situation specifically. Otherwise, he's not on the board at all. Devo, just one share of him on FanDuel, just 2.6% on DraftKings. He's a mid-board player that I'll always welcome shares of, but really doesn't look like he landed all that effectively on either side here. Last time we looked was down a couple shot attempts. Yeah, still at only 7.3 3-point attempts per game. That's down from, if memory serves, mid-8s last year, so down about a 3-point attempt per game. And more notably, making just 32.8% so far this season. For him, that's atrocious. Needs to get that part of his game back. So that's kind of feeding the downside here, but does have the ability to break a 40-plus score for those prices. Other mid-teens options, Ricochet, who I mentioned earlier. Mix and match, not even on DraftKings. 14% of them on FanDuel. Had the monster the other day, surprised with 60.9 FanDuel points in 37 minutes. I did not have him that day. Could go back to, not this level necessarily, but he's been a .86 player at 20.8% usage in his rookie year. Every reason in the world to feed him and give him upside in a pretty soft matchup here. So I wouldn't mind some shares. I don't know that I would exceed that though. 15% kind of as a soft cap. 10% of Clay we talked about already. 6% and below the field on Julius Randle and did not get him at all on DraftKings. 7,300 versus 8,200. That is an interesting price to price comparison. Way cheaper on FanDuel. Should be more of a play. If he continues to be priced in this range, smaller slates, that'll be one to watch. And definitely has the potential, any given slate for sure, back to this range and beyond. Very capable scorer, excellent facilitator for a big man, decent enough rebounder, can stuff a stat sheet on the right day, and is capable of playing minutes, played 35-4 the other day. I've got him just at his 33-minute average. But there's a couple of additional minutes, a couple additional points hiding there for Julius on the right day. Soft matchup against Portland. Couple additional shares maybe. Take him back to the field. Sometimes I like to defy the math. Not actually advising that. Let's jump to centers. Couple of key upside plays here. Again, on FanDuel, it's the guys we've already discussed. Sabonis and AD, just for whatever shares they come up at center as well. And then the one standalone center that we got to on FanDuel is Zubac, who I like a lot. We talked about him. We used him the other day. He put up 32-3 in 33-3. That's typically what you get, maybe a little bit more. 1.11 per minute so far on a little bit of an uptick in usage. Remember, the Clips are spreading out some of those missing Kawhi shots. So Zubac is up a little bit. That's why we had the Norm Powell uptick. That goes away in the future. But right now, those guys are seeing a little bit of additional bump. 1.11 is not a gigantic uptick from his 1.07. I still typically expect around, little above point per minute kind of upside. Definitely a day you could go out there and do some scoring, though. 3% exposure if you wanted to take it up into the maybe even 10 range as a point of differentiation, as a way to block off some good mid-price shares in the late slate at a position you can swap two guys directly into that are better than him. It's not a bad option to keep at least a few shares of. Miles Turner, we got a ton of them on DraftKings, but a hard undercut to the field as well. 6,200 over there. Field is at upper, approaching half, somewhere in that territory. So it's a decent undercut. Definitely still looks like a guy that you're going to want a fair amount of, though, on that DraftKings slate. 1.04 per minute so far this season. Put up 38 FanDuel and 36.4 the other day. Sees his usual complement of usage. Basically this unchanged situation. Down a fair amount as far as the actual output this season. 122 last year, down to 103 so far this season. I'd rather be here, I think, on Miles Turner most of the time. You know, if I can get reasonable position on the player and only be exposed like 14, 15%, 20, I'm much comfier than at 38 on that player. I have no issues going to 38. I have no issues going to 100% on the right spot. But this is telling me this is not the right spot based on how he's impacting the center position for the price. So an even stronger undercut to pretty significant public ownership on Turner. Maybe not the worst idea in the world. He's a very capable per minute guy, and there's really nothing stopping him in that Charlotte front court. So I don't want to totally take it off the table, but I mean, on the other side of that same situation, look how much we got the exact same percentage, but we're taking a big advantage on a cheap Grant Williams on the other side of that than what we're getting here. But again, both guys exposed exactly at 38% in our top 150. There's Keta. Both sites taking significant shares. He's a 7+ value score on FanDuel right now, though. He's been a 0.94 per minute player on 15% usage in his limited opportunities so far this year. He's played just 15 minutes a night over 8 games, but did spike up in a couple recent games. He played 28-1 the other day. Gave us basically a point per minute, right about this kind of output. Last year in limited situations, 1.26. So we know there's a little bit more even to give than what we've gotten out of him so far. Looks like a great piece at 4,100 in the standalone center spot. We got him in more than half of all lineups in our top 150. Above the field, but he's going to be owned by the field. It's no secret. On DraftKings, 27% and the similar kind of position against the field. Just half the overall exposure. 4,500 over there with other viable guys taking some of those center shares. But on a per minute sense, Neemias Queta for 45 blows the doors off of a Grant Williams for 43. It's right there. Or there if you want to look at last year. So again, keep an eye on that Boston starting lineup. That could definitely change. That's a 7:30 game. We'll most likely have it ahead of lock. But definitely one to watch there situationally. But as it is right now, if you see him upper 20s, fire away on both sites and with enthusiasm on FanDuel. Goga is also in that range. Another very good per minute player. I've got him at 28.5 minutes. It's essentially what he played the other night, 29.8. Went out and put up a 37.4 on FanDuel. He's been at 1.14 in this action so far over 5 games. He's always been a 1+ player in a per minute sense. 109 last year on just 12.9% usage. Shots obviously not everything to Goga. For just 4,900, 10% of them on FanDuel. Honestly, with the field being at 10, if you wanted to take some shares from here, or even to me, if some of these are landing at center, I'll take a discount, take some of these shares and put them into here and take a bigger position against the field on Goga and maybe sacrifice a little position against the field on Jared Allen, who I'm, fine on, but he's only slightly better per minute for several thousand more. So that's a guy you could pivot out of. Santi Aldama, for whatever comes up at center spot, you could also pivot some of those into the Goga spot. If the field's not going to be there, you can see the value. If we didn't have that Keta spot, he'd be the top owned. He'd be owned like Keta is. So it's a reasonable spot to drop a couple additional shares into, and I think that honestly probably should be the plan. It's almost exactly what happened here, where we got him 19% and above the field. This is kind of the angle I would want on Goga. Right? So probably put it at exactly the same. Give me 19, 20% with a green arrow that looks like that against the field. Just such a good per minute option with, they've got nowhere else to turn. He's going to go back out and play another, I think at 28.5, I'm probably on the lower end of that spectrum. 28 to 31. Jokic, all the minutes in the world. He played 39.5 the other day. He put up 78 FanDuel points. Upside to 100 on any given slate, if he feels like it. Got him projected at 37 minutes. He's 12-2 on FanDuel. Most expensive player on the slate. He came up just 3.3% of the time over there. For 11.8 on DraftKings, we got him significantly more. 18% of the time. It's an undercut to the field. Field's getting out on a lot of Jokic on the DraftKings slate. But we did definitely get him, and no better example of a player you can take more of if you can get there. So take him back to the field. 25% is fine. Take him north of that. That's also fine. He's a 1.76 per minute player. He's essentially unrivaled. We're getting a little bit of BAM on the other side of that. 7.4K is a dramatically different price. But it's a dramatically different player, 1.18 per minute for BAM. But you'll probably see a couple lineups with those two guys paired together on DraftKings. Not a terrible option. Way less of the field on Santi. 10% hard undercut. We talked about him at the forward spot, though. Joval, none of them on FanDuel. Little bit of them on DraftKings at 8%. That's an undercut to the field. So is the 8% of $8,400 Karl Anthony Towns that we got. Between the two, I'd honestly probably rather have a little bit of Towns just for the true ceiling involved. But for 5,600, Joval's not a bad value option, just short of the 5.5. It's a reasonable value, like mid-board value type guy. You could justify pricing Joval into the 6s, especially in this matchup. Gafford not coming up like crazy, despite that excellent situation that he's in now. Played 23.5, put up 35.9 FanDuel points the other day. He's seen a 4-point uptick in usage. He's only delivered 2/100ths of a point in terms of his per minute mark so far. But he's better than that. We should continue to see production like what that last game looks like if he continues to see a fair amount of minutes. 6% of them on DraftKings, undercut to the field, 7%, a little bit harder undercut to the field on FanDuel. Feels like probably a lot of those shares just went right there. But that's another guy, say you wanted to take that down further at 5,000, I wouldn't take those shares necessarily and dump them into more Keta. You can, or you could do it with a few. If I was trying to undercut this further, let's say I said, all right, full fade Gafford. Sims are telling me get below the field. It's only 7% anyway. Let's take them out of the equation. It's not how I go about things, but for the hypothetical. I think I would take those shares and plunk them directly into Goga at 49. It's only a $100 price swing, so you're not necessarily buying anything. But what you are buying is a bigger advantage on a guy who can be a pretty dramatic per minute player against the field. Seems worth doing. On a guy pivoting from a guy that we already want to undercut. It's just sacrificing your, I had a few shares of Gafford in that situation. I think I'd be willing to do that, honestly. Because he's only at, again, 25 minutes-ish. Getting a couple extra minutes out of Goga, potentially. A similar per-minute performer. It's an interesting back and forth there. Again, Jared Allen level with the field at 19%. Nothing wrong with him. 1.26 per minute on FanDuel. We only got him 5% at 1.21 on DraftKings. That's a little bit below the field. I think you're comfy being there. I don't know that I, again, would want him at 19% and just level with the field. I think I'd rather take an above-below position. And it's perfectly fine to go above. Again, he has been a good performer this year. He put up 44.8 points in their last game in just his standard role, standard minutes. He's got power forward eligibility on the FanDuel slate, too, to give him additional cushion. But I think I'd rather a situation where Fields at 20, I'm at 12. Fields at 18, I'm at 26. Just a little bit of bounce one way or the other. Stewart, again, didn't really come up much. 4% over here, pretty dramatic undercut. And a little bit there. Onesie, twosie shares of everybody else. I don't see anybody else relevant here, gang. A lot of, relevant NBA players as we go down this list, but all these guys came up essentially not at all in these sims. We got a couple shares of Nas on FanDuel. We got a couple shares of $3,500 Jeremiah Robinson Earl in 26 minutes. He's a super low usage, 11.5% this year. Big body. 0.69 per minute, 0.79 last year. He put up 14.5 FanDuel points in 25.6 the other day. Just with all the missing pieces, it's essentially just buying the situation, and he's really not flashing that value because we've got so many other value pieces to work with, and this seems to be more of a position where we're getting a little bit of spend in our high exposures on DraftKings. And then names like Şengün, Chet Holmgren, Ayton, who I mentioned in the run-up on the wrong team, Rudy Gobert, Portis, Claxton, Brolo, everybody came up pretty empty. Couple of shares of any of those guys, perfectly fine. Taking a big position on any of those guys, you're taking an angle that's, specifically not mathing out all that well. But a couple shares, again, any of those guys. Brook Lopez could go out against the Knicks and have a pretty good 32 minutes. Wouldn't completely shock me. Şengün can give you a 50-point day on any given slate. So can Chet Holmgren. Ayton was good for 40 the other day in just 30.8 minutes. Big slate, though. Not where the math is pointing us. Zion out. That's a change. Booker downgrade. All right. Now we're talking. Booker downgrade will impact that KD play that we're already getting a little bit. If Booker doesn't go, we were getting on DraftKings. KD, if memory serves, was like 14% and a little bit of a green up angle from the field. And if the Booker piece of that goes away, that probably makes KD a little bit straight up interesting on DraftKings. I would think we would get more of them on FanDuel as well. Cornette we had out. That's what's creating the Keta situation. Yeah, Mamba, the value, there's just insane value on this slate with 11 and 13 games across these sites. And honestly, too many people priced in the 3s and 4s. They got to do a little bit sharper of a job. Paul Laziki saying Ricochet was in the winning lineup. That's what I missed and finished top 5%. Yeah, I'm pretty sure 0 shares of Ricochet that day. And I wasn't playing 150 lineups, but I had in the lineups I played, I didn't have him at all. And I was looking at him the same way, like, oh boy, if I had him in this spot specifically, that would have been a really nice lineup. Conley on a back-to-back remains to be seen. If memory serves, he played in their first one. I can double check that. I think he did. If there's no Conley, yeah, your point about Randall potential assists could definitely spike a little bit because, again, an underrated facilitator. Oh, this is still... let's see. Yeah, this one and that one. first and second. He played. First game. 13-103 in the second one. That's interesting. Their first back-to-back of the season. The second game that they played, he did play. He started the second game, but he played fewer minutes. He played 20.9 minutes in that one. Didn't play much of the fourth versus the 26-3 with significant closing minutes and a significant chunk of the fourth in the game prior. The first game in that situation was against Denver, and that was a 119-116 fist fight between two good teams. The second game was the one where they surprisingly got beat by 10 by San Antonio. I think that was just kind of everybody's taking the night off despite being on the floor. It was a low-end game out of Minnesota in that one. But he did start their and only back-to-back so far this season. Going off that, I would expect, but you got to keep an eye on it. McConnell out will have an impact on some of the numbers that we talked about in the sense that he's no longer going to be there to take those shares. So they'll just get spread out among some of the other value guys at similar prices, and you'll see some of those other guys go up if you rerun. Yeah, Steve and I we didn't come across Paul Reed as we were talking through that. He's right there, though. Just got him at 20 minutes, 0.67 FanDuel. We did get him 5.3% of the time on DraftKings. So apologies to have completely skipped over him. He was one of the guys I was curious to see where he came up. He's right next to Stewart here. We did get him a little bit more than Stewart. 5.3% level with the field versus the 4% and below the field that we got on Stewart for a little bit more money. I've got it as a 28-20 split between those two guys in Stewart's favor. Paul Reed's the better of the two, though, in a per-minute sense. You can ignore this year. Paul Reed has played 8.8 minutes per game over 3 games. But did notably the other day when he played 12.3 minutes, put up 23.4 FanDuel points to kind of ram the point home about the per-minute production. But in a much bigger sample last year, 1.09 per minute. If we had any security of minutes, he would potentially be stepping into like value play of the day kind of territory. I just don't know that we're getting more than, call it 22 minutes. It's probably at worst a 26-22 split in Stewart's favor. If we got Reed starting kind of news, or Reed's going to play an even split, then this situation even more strongly favors Reed. Right now he just looks okay, but he does come up playable. That's a solid value score. It's just missing the absolute top side of minutes, I think. Derry, Chad, Power, what are you asking, Mama? My model's now projecting optimal points of 406, 408 to win DK today. Curious to see if Ace Mine sees it's the same. They have a ceiling score that calculates in here off the projection upload. I don't know exactly how the boys are calculating it. This is FanDuel one. In the sim that ran, and again, I don't know exactly what their calculation is, but I took some of these 272-ish point lineups, topped out at a higher ceiling than that, for about 10 points higher. Yeah, the absolute extreme for the ceiling that the guys calculate is 416.98. Let's see. Okay, you know what it was? It's not a calculation. It's just the actual highest result. So what that is this lineup, each time it tracks the highest score that each lineup achieved throughout the 150,000 iterations of the slate in the sim. So across 51,000 470 lineups or thereabouts run 150,000 different times against one another. The highest ultimate score that any of them got to was 416.98. But your calculation's not bad because there's only one other lineup that also got to 416. Then there's a gap down to 411, 410, another gap down to 401. And again, these are the ultimate top performers out of 150,000 times 51,000 or whatever that is. So yeah, you're about right, Mamba. That's another potential angle into that Reed play, Steven. Not a bad note there. Is the the beef stew. Is if Stewart picks up a couple of fouls. Not the cleanest player in the world as far as getting in foul trouble. So yeah, could definitely happen and feed some additional minutes to Paul. We're coming up on 6 o'clock though. This show went long. I'm gonna stop this. I'm gonna pull up the Ace Mine results real quick. We'll just take a quick peek at some of these lineups and look how the constructions look. I'm going to guess, based on what we saw, these are going to be pretty starsy scrubsy. Actually, oddly, those are crazy balanced lineups at the very top. That's shocking. For all that crazy value that we talked about, look at, some of those guys are in these lineups, don't get me wrong. But it came out way more balanced than I was thinking. Book, obviously, is now a question mark. Like Joe Val, Freddie Van Vliet, Miles Turner, Josh Hart, Derek White, Jaden Ivey. It would be difficult to tell somebody, make me the most balanced lineup you can on this slate and come up with a more balanced result than that lineup. It gets dramatically more starsy scrubsy a few spots further down with like that Luka lineup. This Triple J lineup is looking that way as well. Ignore the TJ as well. He's off the board. He was coming up as a interesting permanent value square. Fair mix. I am surprised at the nature of these constructions, but we can see clear paths to what the different value plays in the different spots by you. And like I said, it does seem like we're getting more on the back end, more with the big men, power forward center, and then the back end plays like filling out the util spots where we're taking almost pure value, or at most like mid-range guys, with the exception of maybe those Booker shares, mid-range guys with upside in the guard spots. Similar with the small forward spot. And then you can utilize more of these spots, it looks like, for better pay-up-ish kind of plays. This one's interesting. Again, scratch TJ, but we've got other values to pivot into that. Boston, Eason, Tobias, Stewart. I don't know that I love pairing those two. Stewart's the guy I'd probably look to change out. And again, we talked about our Goga pivot. We've got Keta sitting there as obvious value. I like White and his ongoing upside in that situation. And then Giannis and a potentially enhanced KD when he was already looking like a play we wanted to be ahead of the field on. And again, he could potentially go from, get a little bit more. He was 15%, a little bit more than the field. To, if Booker doesn't go, that's one to potentially hit the gas pedal on a little bit. Fairly consistent outside of lineups that just pop Luka into those shares, maybe some of these Brunsons. Does look fairly consistent, like we're taking a lot of our value shares in just those first three spots. And again, you could easily have reconstructed those so those land in the guard or forward spot, but just the way these fall. And to talk about it positionally, that's where they tend to be. So, some inspiration there. Scroll down for a few more. Feel free to slow down and freeze frame to your heart's content. But of course, not advising anybody to play these lineups because that would be contrary to multiple sites' terms of service. And we won't want to do that. FanDuel, It's going to be pretty similar. A lot of Scottie Pippen on the board. Interesting that Zubac got into that top lineup, considering that he was 3% in the FanDuel slate. But remember, potential value in that late night, those 2 late night games, and having him as a pivot point, having some of him, having some of Sabonis, having some of AD, some of LeBron, as just guys that you can bounce around with. Not a bad option on a big slate. Much more Starsy Scrubsy looking on FanDuel, I would say. We're at least getting like a Triple J, Luka, Poole, Halliburton in that 4th one down. Some solid mid-range, multiple mid-range guys. And then a big chunk of Luka in a lot of those FanDuel lineups. Good mix of these guys, and then it's going to zero down toward more just straightforward Keta shares through the center spot. But you can see a fair spread of results. You can get there with a decent mix of centers on FanDuel, but we've got the straight Keta value. We've got the straight Goga value. And again, if I'm looking to pivot out of some of these guys, I'm probably a buyer on that Goga spot. Yeah, I like the Derek White spot, Mamba. Campaign out, Maxi Kleba. All right, Kleba's been out all day. Campaign I got to take out, but that's a straightforward flip. That essentially means each of the top Knicks is going to get an extra minute or so and be projected for like 37 plus, 38 plus. And then what's-his-face is going to get a couple. Kolek. He'll get a couple backup minutes. And like maybe, what did I have Deuce at? Yeah, Deuce will pick up like 2. He'll go from 26 to 28. Kolek will go from, I had him at like 2, probably 8. We're only talking about a matter of spreading 12 minutes back out, right? Campaign, not exactly impactful. So the Knicks, the good players are just going to look a little bit better, and there's really no down. That's not going to create a value guy. So nothing to worry about there. And then, yeah, it's just going to enhance the top guys. So with that in mind, guys, coming up on 6 o'clock, why don't I punch out? Let me go make sure I catch all these updates. Appreciate every single one of you guys who's been here hanging out. Hit the like button when you get a chance. Subscribe so you know when shows go live. Trying to get to 1,000 by the New Year, as I know you guys know. Tell your friends. Tell your families. Shout it from the rooftops. Go into your office if you guys still work for companies that still have offices. Are copy machines still a thing? It's been a while since I've been in an office. Just put Roto Scouts, DFS, fantasy sports. Put it on the copier. Make 1,000 copies on your company and just drop them out the window. Let them fly. Let the winds take them where they will. Don't do that. I'm losing till I win the millies here. Pink hand wave, back to you, buddy. So I'm punching out. Football show is going to be tomorrow during the day. Just tune in for scheduling and everything. No basketball shows over the weekend, but full projections, full hockey projections, football main slate projections over the weekend through the showdown slates. Access to everything under $1 a day. Weekly, monthly, quarterly plans available at rotoscouts.com. Check that out. Follow the @RotoScouts Twitter handle. Check out our guys over at AceMine. Promo code RotoScouts, all in caps. Still gets you 20% off your first month over there. And with that in mind, guys, you absolutely rock. I hope everybody has great weekends. Let's start it off with a bang. Good luck out there tonight. Somebody go win something. We'll see you tomorrow. Later.